Hi guys! In case you haven't heard, Calvin Alp and Hannah Spera of Counterspin Media New Zealand were arrested about 4 or 5 days ago and had their computers and phones and all their production gear etc. seized. Yep, this New Zealand globalist government is forcefully and rapidly extending its overreach and its endeavour to obtain absolute control over all public speech in New Zealand. Here's a little snippet from Calvin and Hannah's epic public address outside the court just yesterday, 31st of August.
All our computers taken, all our phones, all our electronic devices, our storage devices got taken. Yes. This is a fishing expedition to take all our equipment and stop us from broadcasting. The truth. If this was objectionable material that was so dangerous for the public to click on an overseas link to an overseas website, we didn't link to this video that was already deemed objectionable.
No.
It's an investigation that's going on overseas. Okay, so why?
Involving former New Zealand police officers and military. People are getting killed by this genocidal maniac of a government. They're the biggest criminal organisation in this damn country, and we have 4 investigative cases open against them, and that's why the silence.
But people need to understand, 14 years imprisonment is what is on the line here. Over $200,000 worth of fines. They want you to sign up to the digital currency. This is what this whole last 2 years has been about. It's about control. It's not about health.
And we still want to see that unredacted Pfizer contract, Jacinda.
Yes.
I still want to see SARS-CoV-2, the thing that creates your brand name, COVID-19. I want to see the isolated purified virus. We know it doesn't exist. All this has been bullshit. You redefined cold and flu, and you had everyone running for cover.
If you are coming to this information new today, it is okay to review the data, admit you were wrong, and realise the truth and stand on the right side of history. So again, I congratulate each and every one of you who came out today. Each and every one of you have stood in your power for the last 2 years, regardless of the division. I salute you, and it's for our children that we can do this. The best is yet to come. Stand strong. You know who you are. You are an individual created by the most highest creator. Yes. And you deserve to stand in your truth and in your honour, and nobody will strip you of that integrity and of who you are. And I will fight till there's one last breath in me for the future of our children. This is about the children. This is about the children, and this is about the real pandemic, which is child trafficking and child abuse. Yes. Okay? So, do I stand and prop up a government that covers for evil wrongdoing? Have you all seen the Ian Wishart article of 2007, which talks about the 1980s child trafficking ring in Dunedin operating in this country?
By police.
Covered up by Helen Clark. Okay? So, this is what we're standing for. And I will not be silenced.
And we want you to vote Carl Bromley for mayor to clean up the damn city.
This is what true journalism sounds like, and this is what real truth speakers sound like. And in a sense, my broadcast today is about the truth movement versus the freedom movement. Actually, just before we go into that any further, I just want to read something out to you. I'm not going to pass any comment on it just yet, and I will swing back around to it later to explain to you why I read it out. Okay, this is, just so you know, this is a protocol sheet for how members of Destiny Church are to approach their leader, Brian Tamaki. And for those of you outside New Zealand, Brian Tamaki is the one who says he calls himself the founder of the freedom movement in New Zealand, and the mainstream media basically refer to him as kind of like the CEO of the freedom movement. So anyway, this is the protocol sheet for how to approach him. This is for one of their ceremonies where all the men of the church are expected to make a lifelong pledge of allegiance to Bishop Tamaki, and it's called the Covenant. Bow. Move yourself into mid-proximity of Bishop Tamaki, bow on one knee, then arise and move back to your seat with your eyes not leaving Bishop's eyes. For those people with gifts, they may move closer to lay them at Bishop Tamaki's feet, then bow. Honour. While standing, give honour to Bishop and Pastor Hannah, his wife, and the other pastors. Give honour to Bishop as the man of God for our nation. Then give your testimony, saying, Bishop, it's an honour for me to be able to release and lay these things before you today. After that, give testimony to how Destiny Church has helped to change your life. No mention there of God changing your life, it's the church. Give honour again to Bishop Tamaki and the pastors, and finish. Then for the actual covenant itself, move into close proximity of Bishop Tamaki, move your hand into the handshake position, then say, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. Then bow your head and hug Bishop, hold on to a Bishop as long as you need. Okay, so as I explained before, I will swing back around to that and explain why I read that out just a little bit later. Okay, so as I said, Counterspin Media were arrested and had all their gear seized the other day, and Billy Takahika and Vinnie Eastwood have also just endured a long and deliberately drawn out trial at the Auckland District Court for breaching COVID protocols. They emerged 2 or 3 mornings ago saying that the judge was reserving his decision at this stage. But they are potentially facing sentences of several months prison time to add to the many other consequences that they've already faced for exercising their right to protest. I don't know too much detail other than Billy Takahika, his bank accounts were not only frozen but shut down altogether a little while ago, and both of them have been prohibited from being able to attend protests and speak publicly. So this is just part of the price that they've had to pay for simply exercising their right to protest. And you may say, well, it's a little bit different because it was during level 4. But to me, the level 4 palaver is just completely a fraudulent mechanism that they're using to justify cancelling out our right to protest. Our long-established right to protest and speak freely should supersede any new law that isn't even, subject to democratic evaluation, surely. That notion was actually a substantial part of Billy's defence. But I guess we'll soon see whether the judge will agree with that, or whether he too was a globalist government pawn. Probably going to be the latter, let's face it. You're probably also aware that Chantal Baker's Facebook page was very recently shut down, and also the Voices for Freedom Facebook page was removed. A prominent media voice, Avi Yemeni, was prevented from even entering our country the other day, just earlier this week, in a move to prevent him from speaking or infecting others with the courage to speak. And there's also been many others that have been harassed and muzzled by this new regime too. Carl Bromley from Christchurch and Lee Williams, just to name a couple. All these people will testify that the actions that have been taken against them are off the back of totally unsound allegations against them. Take Calvin and Hannah, for example. Their arrests and the loss of their valuable equipment is based on allegations that they shared footage of the mosque shootings and that they publicly called it a government-orchestrated attack, a false flag, which used to be the right of media to at least ask these questions and even, dare I say it, pass opinion at times. But anyway, so just to sort of clarify, as a nation, we're being told, not just New Zealand, all over the world obviously, we're being told that we're no longer allowed to say that 2 + 2 = 4, whether pertaining to the mosque attack or COVID or World Health Organization or World Economic Forum or sudden adult death syndrome or monkeypox or tomato flu or banana armadillo flu pox or whatever it is they have lined up for us next. We're still kind of allowed to think 2 + 2 = 4, but probably not for much longer, I'd say. But we're most definitely not allowed to say it out loud. You can say it equals 5 or 3, but to say that 2 + 2 actually equals 4 is literally becoming a criminal offence in New Zealand, as Calvin and Hannah just recently found out. Now, on the other hand, I'd just like to make some observations. Now, please hear me out. They may not be particularly popular, and I'm not trying to persuade you or tell you what to think. The role of media has always been to facilitate informed thought and conversation, and I'm just trying to do that. Okay, so I've noticed recently, Brian Tamaki was not only allowed to hold a political rally on the lawns of Parliament the other day, as well as travel the country promoting his new umbrella anti-government coalition, but he's being treated very, very differently to the people that I've just mentioned. He appears to be enjoying an unusual turn in mainstream media supportiveness, appearing on talk shows and being spared of all the usual insults usually hurled at him by the media. I mean, there used to be near an article where he wasn't referred to in some derogatory way. But now suddenly mainstream media are treating him very decently indeed. I found myself wondering, why is that? It's highly unusual. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, Luxon, that's the leader of the National Party here in New Zealand, for those of you outside New Zealand, posted that he'd think it would be really cool, if people in New Zealand would call for a snap election and maybe place a vote of no confidence in the government. It's for reasons like that opposition will often employ the aid of controlled opposition, in this case to avoid the appearances of a conflict of interest, because people might say, oh, perhaps he just wants to be the leader. So anyway, just a week or two after that, Brian Tamaki's social media outlets, including his Freedom and Rights Coalition page, suddenly started campaigning for all Kiwis to call for a snap election and place a vote of no confidence in the government. Understandably, other freedom groups and minor parties were horrified and asked him to please stop, because this would obviously completely undermine and probably destroy their efforts to establish an effective coalition against the government. But regardless of their pleas, Brian Tamaki carried on calling for this snap election, knowing full well it would hand the governance of our country over to the deeply globalist Luxon, basically gift wrapped and tied with a bow. And then shortly after that took place, a scathing hit piece, a documentary on the key players of the freedom movement was released, called Fire and Fury, by the hideously government-controlled propaganda outlet Stuff. It mercilessly named and shamed what it called the key players, people like Damien Dement and Voices for Freedom, Chantal Baker, Carleen Heriora, and many others. But the man who's organised or controlled, depending on how you look at it, virtually all the protests, Brian Tamaki and his organisation, the Freedom and Rights Coalition, was not even mentioned. Some might say they should have been the number one key player. They were completely spared of all the character assassinations and mocking and ridiculing and all the false accusations that the rest of them were slapped with. Chantal Baker's Facebook page was removed immediately after this documentary. Make no mistake, although it may not have swayed you, it cemented their villainy in much of our nation's eyes. Just saying, for the Freedom and Rights Coalition and Brian Tamaki to be completely absent from this documentary, it seems very strange to me. It makes no sense. Some may say that, it's probably because they're afraid of Brian Tamaki's lawyers. Well, they haven't been in the past, and they wouldn't be saying anything illegal by just mentioning him and stating his involvement. That wouldn't be anything that could incur litigation. And others have said, perhaps it's a race thing. But, well, I don't know what to say to that other than they didn't spare Carleen Heriora because of race. Then, the media widely publicised the time and location of Brian Tamaki's party promo rally, which was presented as a freedom protest, which again is highly unusual because in the past they've done all they can do to make us virtually invisible, certainly not advertising any protest in the media. Then they reported very favourably on how well his rally went, and Sean Plunkett from the platform even complimented Brian on air about how he really knows how to put on a great rally. Here he is having a little chat with Brian and Hannah.
In the studio, and I've got a bonus here by both the Tamakis, by Brian Tamaki and Hannah Tamaki. Lovely of you guys to come into the studio. Nice to have you both with us. Well, firstly, I want to say to both of you, and I said this to you yesterday, well done for running what was a democratic demonstration and political event on Parliament. I have to say, you know how to organise a demo, don't you, Brian? Hannah, you lead Vision New Zealand, right?
Yeah, and we are a registered party.
You are I always like clearing that up.
And I went from 0 to 1 point something on a poll, which was actually pleasantly surprising.
Yeah.
Then, over the next couple of days after the rally, mainstream media has been reporting repeatedly that Brian is again trying to trigger a snap election. It would be the absolute worst thing for the political situation of the freedom movement. Not that I put any faith in politics, actually, but still. And it would completely fly in the face of everything he said he was trying to accomplish with the coalition. It's not what he said at the rally. He never mentioned a snap election. And if it's just erroneous reporting, why has he not issued a statement refuting these claims? There was also these reports where Luxon said he wouldn't rule out working with Brian Tamaki's new party. Brian Tamaki's actually posted these reports onto his Facebook page 3 times now. Again, he hasn't made any statement saying that he would refuse this collaboration. And in fact, the leader of the only other party actually signed up to his coalition, Michael Jacome from New Nation Party, commented this in response to Brian's post, making it very clear that he had been more than thrilled to work with Luxon. This is the globalist Luxon who hangs out and talks future planning with guys like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. He didn't go to Davos for a ski trip. This is the Luxon that's already stated that once he comes into power, he won't be touching our full-term abortion laws, he certainly won't be changing them, and he'll likely establish not only a no jab, no job policy, but as he said, also a no jab, no benefit policy. He said that he intends to make it so that if you don't jab not only yourself, but also your children, then you will have no income. And then to really make his elitist values known, he called beneficiaries bottom feeders on News Talk ZP just a little while ago. Here he is having a chat about benefits in the welfare system with Kerry McIver.
And if you want to have a go and you want to make something of yourself, we don't just do bottom feeding and just focus on the bottom.
Yes, he considers those that are on benefits, whether it's due to mandates or disabilities or whatever, as bottom feeders. So if you're a nurse that sat by the bedside of dying patients for 40 years and has been stripped of your career because you don't want to take the jab and are forced to be on a benefit and barely making ends meet as a result, you're a bottom feeder, according to Luxon. But like I said, he'd even take those benefits away, all income away, under his leadership if you don't take the jab. So you won't be called a bottom feeder then. You won't be fed at all if it's up to Luxon. This is the guy that the Freedom and Rights Coalition is trying to convince us would be better than Jacinda Ardern. Labour must go. That's been their message. Do they just have no idea who he is? It's hard to say. Now, World Economic Forum talks about what they call soft laws and hard laws in regards to the establishment of the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the Great Reset or the New World Order. The soft laws are all about normalisation and coercion and are most effective when administered with a big smile and a hair flick, you know, by a mummy type sort of character. Sound familiar? But the hard laws are a move towards enforcement, and you'd need a more imposing figure for that. Now, many people say that Labour and National are just two wings of the same bird, and I agree, except I kind of more describe it as Labour has kind of been like the wings. Jacinda Ardern's been the wings of this bird, but Luxon is going to be the talons, I believe. Now, that's the guy that Brian Tamaki appears to be sidling up to at the moment. I'm seeing an interesting thing in all of this. You know what? The government's not in the least bit adverse to the freedom movement. They're no threat. They don't care if we walk up and down the road shouting freedom and waving placards. It's actually really good for their cause because it makes it look like this is a democratic government after all. And it also fosters that social derision that they so crave for us. But more importantly, it deflects attention from the real issues and the real evils going on behind the curtain. A controlled opposition group would love you to pour your time and energy and money into that kind of thing and drain you of all your resources and your energy in the process. That's what controlled opposition do. They keep the disgruntled masses from doing anything drastic or anything that could actually be effective. They can be used like a pressure valve in a sense. I talked to someone the other day who'd had a really sad jab reaction testimony and who'd spent thousands on getting not only themselves but others, spending a lot of money on flights, didn't want to look at their credit card because it's not really something they could afford, to get people there to this protest, and now they can't even entertain the notion that perhaps this could be controlled opposition because of the gravity of what that might mean and what it's cost them. Carl Bromley, a mayoral candidate in Christchurch, he was the one that actually first put forward this idea of a freedom coalition, and him and others had made substantial moves towards making it become a reality. His plan was for a coalition that would not be controlled by any central figure, a fair and even platform, and he didn't want to be at the helm of that. It was moving along nicely too, until it was, in a sense, hijacked by the Freedom and Rights Coalition, Brian Tamaki. They took his model and began to run with it themselves, either because they wanted to run with it themselves or because they wanted to remove it from the hands of anyone who actually might do some real damage with it. It was a real blow to all those who had made so much progress. Make no mistake, Brian Tamaki is going to be holding the umbrella in this umbrella coalition, and everything that anyone underneath it does will ultimately be subject to him. For example, those who aren't willing to come under his umbrella already are not particularly welcome to speak at the Freedom rallies. I know he says it won't be that way, and he sounds convincing, but this man's history, right up to today, may suggest that that won't be the case. Carl Bromley, for example, has a wealth of experience and knowledge in New Zealand's association with global enterprise like the World Economic Forum and the UN and the like, as well as, like I said, being the mayoral candidate for Christchurch. And he's never been invited onto the platform at the Christchurch rallies. Why not? Wouldn't it make sense to get behind him as he runs for mayor? I mean, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to have a fully awake freedom fighter as the mayor of our second largest city? Why aren't the Freedom and Rights Coalition using these events to rally support for all freedom representatives? Why does it appear that some of our most important voices are actually being silenced? Again, that would be how controlled opposition works. It's actually a textbook example. Carl would shine a light on what truly goes on behind the curtain and what this is all really about, and it would have more than a few non-freedom fighters hearkening their ear. But he's being shushed and disenfranchised by the Freedom and Rights Coalition, like a lot of others are. By the way, I need to say, these are my observations, 100%, nothing that anyone else, Carl Bromley or anyone else, has actually told me. Another observation I've made, which appears to me to be rather glaring and actually their most dangerous aspect, is that the Freedom and Rights Coalition never talk about globalist activities. They don't talk about World Economic Forum or the UN or WHO, or say anything that may prepare people for what's coming. I've never seen it mentioned on their websites, and they barely allow it to be touched on at any of the rallies or protests. Many have requested to speak about these issues at the rallies, but Freedom and Rights Coalition has said no. At one of these rallies, the Christchurch Destiny pastor and Brian's so-called right-hand man, Derek Tate, stood up and declared that he would never be vaccinated, and also stated it clearly on his Facebook page. Yet he has been seen attending venues that require a vaccine pass. Strangely, once again, it was Sean Plunkett from the platform who came to Derek Tate's aid, saying that Derek says this isn't true. But one worker in a fast food restaurant says that it's actually Derek's account that's false, and that Derek most definitely showed him a vaccine pass. I'm not passing opinion either way, but I do wonder why he was in there and attempting to order if he already knew that you needed a vaccine pass to be able to do so in the first place. These articles also talk about how Brian and Hannah leased out some of Destiny's buildings for COVID testing and vaccinations. When Hannah Tamaki was directly asked, "So you're not opposed to making money out of this?" she replied, "We don't need to talk about that part of it." Of course, it's well within their rights to do so, but how are you going to stand against something if you're actually profiting from it at the same time? I know a lot of people will be shouting at me through the screen right now, but Sam, we need harmony. We just need to put our differences aside and work together. And I understand that, I agree, but it's never wisdom to work in harmony with a controlled opposition. I'm not saying that they are, but there are some serious red flags in my opinion. These people are at best just wanting the limelight at the exclusion of all others, and perhaps really genuinely unaware of what's actually going on in the world. But at worst, they're working both sides here. And if you look at the example of any war, any double agent does some serious damage, can easily take out an army of foot soldiers. So, yeah, it would harm our cause to try and work with any controlled opposition. It certainly wouldn't help it. It would probably destroy it. We can't compromise the truth for the sake of harmony. It basically permits mass delusion for the sake of harmony. It's a little bit like saying, let's not anyone say that there's a wolf in the sheep's paddock because, well, Bob doesn't really agree, and, Susie really likes him, and We might be missing a couple of lambs, yeah, but we can't prove it was him. So let's just leave him be and not say anything for the sake of harmony. Anyway, if the freedom movement has been compromised, the truth movement hasn't been, and that's the good news. It never can be. Our power was never in noise and numbers. It's always been in the fact that we have the truth, the full, unabridged truth, not just a little bit of fairly innocuous truth and some great chants and hold some great rallies, but that we have the kind of truth that actually fills a room and leaves darkness nowhere to hide. The kind of truth that exposes the corruption of this globalist government and reveals its true agenda and its true crimes. And when that's teamed with integrity and honesty and, dare I say it, humility, that's an extremely powerful weapon. It's a weapon that our enemy will never have. They know how powerful it is, or they wouldn't fight so hard to cover it and silence it and disable it. I guess that's why it says in that most infamous of truth publications, the one that they've been trying to discredit for centuries, that it's actually the truth that sets you free, not how big and noisy you are. I guess that's why we're seeing these truth speakers shut down, left, right and centre at the moment. And those that don't really go there, still allowed to carry on and almost in a sense handed the mic. It takes guts to speak the full truth. And as Counterspin experienced a few days ago, it comes at a cost. You may not get standing ovations and people licking your boots when you do. Look, I have no personal grievance with Brian Tamaki, I assure you. But I just think that it's paramount that we're aware of what's really going on and that we're allowed to ask questions. I know one of Brian Tamaki's favourite statements is that you know me by my fruit, look at my fruit, or you'll know them by their fruit, something along those lines. I think he's taking it a little bit out of context because he's talking about fruits as being his achievements when he's actually quoting a scripture that's talking about your fruits being your character, aspects of your character. Okay, then, in that true context, let's have a look at some of the relevant fruit from just the last few days, shall we? Not to slander or bicker, but because it's pertinent to know who we're allying with. And let's face it, there's a Pied Piper situation going on here with many, many people putting their full trust in Brian Tamaki. Okay. Brian Tamaki said to all freedom fighters not long ago that he promised he would never use this whole freedom movement as a way to get himself into politics. Then Freedom and Rights Coalition announced a few days ago that we were going to have a protest, and cool, we all thought we haven't had one of those for a while. But once we got there, we found out that it was very much a political rally to further Brian Tamaki's political ambitions. That was clear. He announced that he was starting an umbrella party and that one of the two committed parties thus far is his wife's registered political party. So to get it straight, he's the head of the coalition and his wife is heading one of the two parties in that coalition. And of course he's going to have input into that party one way or another. He's very politically minded. And I was actually a member of Destiny Church, and it is a very patriarchal institution. So, yeah, and then of course he's at the helm of the coalition. So that's apparently him not getting into politics. Seems like a little bit of a stretch of the truth to me. Then at the rally, he said that the Outdoors Party was fully committed to his umbrella party. The next day, Outdoors Party said publicly that they thoroughly refuted that, said that they were shocked and called his statement inappropriate. Doesn't seem entirely honest, but oh well. We also have to think about the fact that he called it for a snap election in the recent past, and according to mainstream media, is doing that again right now. In other words, a national government in shutting down the efforts of an already burgeoning resistance movement, coalition. He's now also enjoying an undeniable respite from negative mainstream media. This man is a pastor of a church in one of New Zealand's lowest socio-economic areas, but owns well more than one mansion and a huge array of very expensive cars and motorbikes and boats, and has had more five-star international resort holidays than I've had cooked breakfasts, and wears enough jewellery on one day to pay off most of the mortgages in my street. I noticed he had actually toned that down for the rally, but he was at a smaller town rally the other day, and he had massive diamond rings on every single finger, as well as a huge medallion around his neck. He's telling you who he is. And if his church donations have been converted into this much personal wealth, do you really trust him with political donations? Look, I know he's a fantastic speaker and an impressive leader, so much so that his church members call him apostle. Used to call him bishop, now they call him apostle. Admittedly, they have to, they're told to. They also have a protocol for how to behave around him. You know, you don't sit down till he's sat down, you don't stand up till he's stood up, don't begin eating until he's begun eating, and all that kind of thing. A few years ago, he required the men in his church to make a covenant with him and participate in a ceremony where they pledged their lives to him and in return received a ring with Brian Tamaki's name on it. This is a church, but there's no mention of Jesus or God on this ring. And of course, these rings were hundreds of dollars, and they had to be paid for by the men themselves. I don't know if that's still a practice that they're doing now, as I'm no longer a part of the church, but yeah, back then, if you didn't make this covenant, you weren't considered a real member of the church. Let me just read out again that protocol sheet from that ceremony. By the way, this is Destiny authored, unedited by me, and if it's Destiny authored, you can be sure it got Brian Tamaki's rubber stamp. Okay. Bow. Okay, well, we have a problem right from the start. This is a church. We're not supposed to bow the knee to any man, but anyway. Move yourself into mid-proximity of Bishop Tamaki, bow on one knee, then arise and move back to your seat with your eyes not leaving Bishop's eyes. I guess that must be some sort of backwards walking manoeuvre. I'm not sure. The women folk weren't allowed to be present during these ceremonies. For those persons with gifts, they may move closer to lay it at Bishop Tamaki's feet, then bow. Honour. While standing, give honour to Bishop, Pastor Hannah, that's his wife, and all the other pastors. Give honour to Bishop as the man of God for our nation. Testimony, give your testimony. Then give testimony to how Destiny Church has helped to change your life. Again, no mention of God or Jesus. Honour, give honour again to Bishop Tamaki and the pastors, and finish. Right, at the covenant, move into close proximity of Bishop Tamaki. Move your hand into the handshake position. Then say, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will never leave you. Then bow your head and hug Bishop. Hold on to your Bishop as long as you need. Well, so I guess, you know, I was actually heavily involved with the church at that time. And I was a sax player in the band, and the band was pretty much all men. I was privy to some conversations about the expensive gifts that they were bringing, and they were top-notch, believe me. They were expected to be. And there were other things that were going on in the church at that time that were far more serious and disturbing than this. For example, let's start by just having a little listen to this little talk that Brian Tamaki gave his followers back in 2003.
But I feel very strongly in my heart that the word of the Lord came to me very strong. I predict in the next 5 years, by the time we hit our 10th anniversary, and I don't say this lightly, that we will be ruling the nation. True governance, true kingdom authority expressed through the people of God and through our political orders.
The prophecy was affirmed by Brian's mentor and the one he calls his spiritual father, Bishop Eddie Long from Atlanta. Here he is.
He made a declaration that in 5 years you shall be ruling and reigning in this nation. That means you control the wealth. That means you control the riches. That means you control the politics. That means you control the social order. That means that you are in charge.
Bishop Long visited the church again in 2008 for the Decade of Destiny conference shown here, by which time I myself was involved with the church. Needless to say, a younger and more gullible version of myself. He brought with him a 17-year-old male companion who, upon his return to Atlanta, revealed that Bishop Long had been having sex with him during that New Zealand visit. The boy testified that before they left Atlanta, Bishop Long bought him a Chevy Malibu as a bribe to keep him silent. Then very soon after that, several more young male victims came forward. His wife left him and Long settled out of court. Personally, I was horrified because Tamaki and Long and the young male companion had all spent so much time together over that visit. And I began to ask questions because nothing was being said about this, but I was always told to be quiet. We were all supposed to act like nothing happened. But even though Bishop Long was sued by the families of several young boys in 2010, standing accused of using his authority and bribes to coerce these young boys into homosexual sex acts with him, that didn't stop Brian Tamaki from inviting him back to his church, where he again appeared in 2016, as you can see in these articles here. He stood on the stage at this conference, ankle deep in banknotes, yelling at the congregation to repent, 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 because it eases the burden in the head. And as we read further down the article, again Brian Tamaki refused to comment about the allegations. But anyway, even though this was the only other voice that was confirming the prophecy that Brian said meant he would be ruling New Zealand one day, during my time at the church at least, he would frequently refer back to it, saying that God said it, so that means it is going to happen one day, even if the timing was a little bit out. Obviously, it's Brian Tamaki's right, 100%, if he wants to get into politics or not. It's, not my business, but it concerns me because as you can see from the protocol sheet before and other things, this is a man who, once he gets a little bit of power and once you get close to him, reveals that he actually wants to be revered as God. And, how can you trust someone like that at a time like this when being able to trust is paramount? He can do no wrong in the eyes of his followers, but I can think of a few other impressive leaders in history who also fit that bill. Who didn't turn out to be for the people. These abilities that Brian Tamaki holds will never be a valid substitute for integrity. I don't care how smooth your words are or how impressive you are. If you don't have integrity and honesty and you're not speaking the full truth of what's going on, I, for one, am not going near it. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts, kind of, maybe. I know I'm probably going to get a barrage of angry comments, but that's okay. This is not about me. I think it's just a conversation that we need to have, and at the very least, we need to be able to ask questions. I just personally hate seeing people taken advantage of, especially at a time like this. Oh, and if there are any Freedom and Rights Coalition people, or even the Tamakis themselves watching this, perhaps one way that we could begin to deal with this would be to have an explanation for why you were completely absent from the Fire and Fury documentary, and an explanation for why you called for a snap election a little while ago, and a clarification on whether that is actually what you're doing again at the moment, as mainstream media reports that you are. Okay, thanks for watching. I'm going to go and crawl under a rock and hide for a couple of days until they stop throwing things at me. So if anyone could let me know when it's safe to come out, I'd appreciate it. Actually, I'll let Calvin Alp have the final word.
All our computers taken, all our phones, all our electronic devices, our storage devices got taken.
They better return my dick shots.
And everything needs to be...